The message came in at exactly 6:42 p.m., just like it always did, brief and familiar enough to feel harmless. "I'm stuck at work, don't wait up." No heart emoji, no apology, no explanation. Just a sentence that had slowly trained me to accept absence as normal, distance as mature, and loneliness as the quiet price of being understanding. I read it twice, then placed my phone face down on the table, telling myself that this was what adult relationships looked like, that love didn't need constant reassurance, that trust meant not asking questions that might create problems where there were none. For a long time, I had been very good at convincing myself of those things. But that evening, something inside me felt unsettled in a way I couldn't name, like a subtle pressure under my skin, a whisper that refused to be ignored, even though I tried to drown it out with routine. I cooked dinner for one, barely touched it, then stood by the window longer than necessary, watching the city settle into night, wondering when waiting had quietly become my entire role in my own marriage. I didn't plan to go anywhere special. I told myself I just needed air, movement, something that wasn't filled with silence. I put on a dress I hadn't worn in months, not to impress anyone, but because I wanted to remember what it felt like to choose myself, even in small, almost meaningless ways. The restaurant wasn't loud or dramatic. It was warm, softly lit, the kind of place people chose was they were celebrating something that mattered. As I stepped inside, I hesitated, suddenly aware of how alone I was among couples leaning toward each other, hands intertwined, laughter flowing easily between them. That's when I heard his voice. Not the tired, distant tone he used with me lately, but relaxed, confident, alive. I didn't recognize it at first. I just recognized the way it made my stomach tighten. I followed the sound without thinking, my steps slow, controlled, as if my body already understood what my mind was still trying to protect me from. And then I saw him, my husband, sitting at table 5, not rushed, not stressed, not trapped at work. He was smiling. Across from him sat a woman I had never seen before, young, radiant, leaning toward him as if the world had narrowed down to just the two of them. Her hand rested lightly on the table, and on her finger was a ring that caught the light every time she moved. Not my ring. Something inside me went very quiet. I didn't feel anger the way people describe it, sharp and explosive. What I felt was clarity, sudden and merciless, as if years of unanswered questions had finally aligned into a single, undeniable truth. A waiter noticed me standing there, frozen, and gently asked if I needed help. I don't know why I answered him, why my voice stayed calm when my hands were trembling, but I said, "My husband told me he was stuck at work." The waiter's expression changed instantly, confusion melting into discomfort, then into something close to pity. He hesitated before leaning closer and whispering, "He said this was his fiancée. They come here often." Often. The word echoed in my chest, heavy and final. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene that could later be rewritten as hysteria or exaggeration. Instead, I sat down at an empty table behind them and watched. I watched the way he touched her hand, the way he leaned in close, the way he laughed, free of the exhaustion he had brought home to me for months. And in that quiet observation, I understood something that hurt more than betrayal itself. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't confusion. It was a life carefully divided. And I had only just been invited to see the part he never meant for me to find. I left the restaurant without looking back. not because I was afraid to see his face, but because I refused to give him the satisfaction of my reaction. I knew, instinctively, that the moment I spoke, the story would stop being about his betrayal and start being about my emotions, and I wasn't ready to let that happen. The air outside felt colder than it should have, sharp against my skin, as if the city itself was trying to wake me up from the life I had been sleepwalking through. I stood there for a few seconds longer than necessary, my heart racing, my mind moving strangely slow, like it needed time to adjust to a reality it had spent years avoiding. When I got home, the apartment felt unfamiliar, as if it no longer recognized me. I walked from room to room, touching things he had once chosen, realizing how carefully he had curated a space where I was comfortable enough not to ask questions, safe enough not to look too closely. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, replaying conversations, late-night excuses, canceled plans, moments when he had looked at his phone and smiled quietly before turning the screen away from me. I saw them now for what they were, not coincidences, not stress, but rehearsals for another life. He came home after midnight. I heard his keys at the door, his familiar movements, the casual confidence of a man who believed his story was still intact. He stopped when he saw me sitting there, fully dressed, lights on, my eyes steady in a way that immediately unsettled him. "You're still up," he said, as if nothing had happened. I looked at him and felt something shift inside me, something final. "I was at the restaurant tonight," I said quietly. For a fraction of a second, his face betrayed him. Not guilt, calculation. The rapid mental search for the version of reality that would cost him the least. He laughed softly, too quickly. "What restaurant?" "Table 5, I replied. "She wears a ring." Silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. Then he did what I had seen him do so many times before. He minimized, softened, reshaped the truth until it almost sounded reasonable. He said I was misinterpreting things, that she was just a colleague, that things had been difficult between us lately, that he hadn't meant for it to look like that. "I told her I wasn't ready for a serious relationship," he added, as if that absolved him of everything else. The irony was almost unbearable. He had said the same thing to me once, years ago, right before asking me to marry him, that he was afraid of commitment, that remembering that fear made our relationship special, something we had overcome together. Now I understood. He wasn't afraid of commitment. He was afraid of honesty. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I let him talk, because every word he spoke felt like another thread unraveling the image I had once protected for him, even from myself. And in that quiet observation, something powerful happened. I stopped needing him to admit anything. The truth no longer required his confirmation. Over the next few days, I became very still, not weak, focused. I collected screenshots. I checked dates. I looked at bank statements I had never questioned before. I noticed how much of our life had quietly been divided, how carefully he had kept certain parts of himself just out of reach. He sensed the change. He tried to become attentive, affectionate in a way that felt rehearsed, offering explanations I hadn't asked for, touching my shoulder as if familiarity could rewrite betrayal. But it was too late. The silence between us was no longer confusion. It was resolve. And while he believed I was processing, forgiving, calming down, I was preparing. He noticed before he admitted it. Men like him always do. Not because they are perceptive, but because they are deeply uncomfortable when the emotional balance shifts and they are no longer the center of someone's attention, when explanations stop being requested and forgiveness is no longer being negotiated. I stopped asking where he was going. I stopped reminding him of plans. I stopped adjusting my schedule around his absence. At first, he seemed relieved, mistaking my withdrawal for acceptance, telling himself that the storm had passed, that whatever fracture had appeared in our marriage could be smoothed over with time and minimal effort. But then the questions came. Why are you so quiet lately? Is something wrong? Are you still upset about that night? He needed reassurance, and I no longer offered it. Instead, I watched him struggle with a version of me he had never had to deal with before. One who didn't seek his approval, one who no longer needed his attention to feel anchored in reality. Behind the scenes, I kept going. I spoke to a lawyer without telling anyone, not to start a war, but to understand the rules. I learned how finances actually worked, how much was in my name, how much wasn't, how carefully he had positioned himself as indispensable while keeping his options open. I discovered things he never expected me to look for. Small inconsistencies at first, then patterns. Expenses that didn't match his explanations. Withdrawals timed perfectly around his late nights at work. A second phone number that appeared more often than it should have. And every discovery brought the same strange calm. Because the more I saw, the less I doubted myself. When I finally told him I wanted space, he reacted the way people do when they realize control is slipping through their fingers, not with sadness, but with urgency disguised as concern. He said I was being distant, that I was changing, that he felt like he was losing me. And for the first time, I didn't soften the truth to protect his feelings. I already lost you, I said. I just didn't know it yet. That was when the narrative shifted. He stopped trying to explain and started trying to manage. He suggested counseling, not to heal, but to buy time. He spoke about commitment, about the future, about how relationships require patience, conveniently forgetting the future he had already been offering someone else. And when he realized that words were no longer enough, the tone changed again. Subtle at first. Impatience, defensiveness, then irritation. He accused me of being cold, of overreacting, of holding on to something that should have been left behind. But I wasn't holding on to the past. I was holding on to myself, and that frightened him more than anger ever could. Because anger still engages, still negotiates, still cares. Detachment does not. The moment he understood that I was no longer afraid of losing him was the moment he truly started to panic. And panic makes people careless. It makes them reveal things they meant to keep hidden. And soon, very soon, he would make a mistake he couldn't talk his way out of. The mistake came quietly, not as a dramatic confession or a public collapse, but as a small, careless slip made by a man who believed he still had time to fix everything. He forgot his phone at home one morning, not the one I knew about, the other one. It buzzed on the kitchen counter while I was making coffee, vibrating insistently, as if it had been waiting for me to finally notice it. I didn't rush to pick it up. I didn't feel panic or excitement, just a strange sense of inevitability, like this moment had been approaching for a long time. The messages were not poetic. They weren't even particularly romantic. They were logistical, plans, reservations, shared frustrations about complications, about me. That was the part that surprised me the least. I took photos of everything. Then I put the phone back exactly where it has been and finished my coffee. When he came home that evening, I didn't confront him right away. I waited until he started talking about his day, about work, about how tired he was, performing normalcy with the ease of someone who had rehearsed it for years. Then I placed the printed screenshots on the table between us. He didn't yell, he didn't deny. He just stared at them, his shoulders slowly sinking, as if the effort of holding up his double life had finally become too heavy. "You went through my things," he said, reaching for control one last time. I looked at him calmly. "You left them in my life." That was the end of the conversation, not because there was nothing left to say, but because nothing he could say would change what I now saw clearly, not just who he was, but who I had become. The separation was not dramatic. There were no screaming matches, no slammed doors, no public accusations. There was paperwork, silence, distance, and an unexpected sense of relief. The woman from the restaurant reached out to me weeks later. She apologized, not because she owed me anything, but because the illusion had shattered for her too. She had been promised a future built on lies she didn't know she was participating in. I wished her well. Genuinely, because I finally understood that this story was never about competition between women. It was about a man who believed he could divide himself without consequence. The consequences came quietly. Mutual friends stopped calling him. Work rumors followed him. Trust evaporated faster than he expected. And I moved on without announcing it. I found a new apartment filled with light. I learned how to enjoy evenings without waiting. I rediscovered parts of myself I had slowly minimized to fit into a marriage that required my silence to survive. Sometimes I think back to that restaurant, to table 5, to the moment when my life split into before and after, and I don't feel anger anymore. I feel gratitude, because the truth didn't destroy me. It freed me. I didn't win him back. I didn't expose him publicly. I didn't get revenge. I got something better. My clarity, my dignity, my future. And if you're listening to this and recognizing pieces of your own story in mine, let me tell you this. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is stop explaining, stop waiting, and walk away with herself intact. Thank you so much for watching and supporting StoryHeart.